Hey, what's up guys? As always, I hope you're doing great. Today we're going to analyze the largest and most dangerous special infected created by the green flu from Left 4 Dead, the tank. In this episode, we'll look not only at the anatomical and physiological changes present in this infected, but also at possible explanations behind these modifications and to why the most widespread theory within the community actually doesn't make much sense. But first, as usual, let's get some context, and it is best to start by briefly talking about the pathogen or illness responsible for the events of Left 4 Dead, the green flu. A disease of unknown origin, likely viral in nature, highly contagious and rapidly progressive, that not only is capable of infecting the brain, driving its victims to an erratic and aggressive behavior, but that also has an extremely strong mutagenic effect that, depending on the host, can cause a wide variety of extreme anatomical and physiological modifications, and these are the special infected. The tanks who we'll be analyzing in this video belong precisely to this same group of abominations. They are without a doubt the strongest of all infected, capable of launching a survivor several feet or meters back with a single punch, tearing up chunks of pavements with their bare hands and lifting and throwing vehicles with ease. All these physical feats are obviously the result of intense muscle hypertrophy far beyond what you would expect from a normal human. This is accompanied by an exaggerated body size of roughly 3.5 meters or about 10 feet tall and nearly 2 meters or about 6 feet wide according to in-game dialogues, although these dimensions are somewhat disguised by the hunched posture the tank typically adopts. Despite this size and a weight that is almost certainly as inhuman, tanks are nearly as agile and quick as a healthy survivor, thanks in part to the use of their highly developed upper body muscles to propel and move themselves quickly. And if that wasn't enough, they also possess incredibly high damage resistance and an extreme aggression. All of this makes them arguably the most dangerous infected of all, a position only contested by the witch. Now, as the most widely accepted theory in the community suggests, it might seem like tanks were steroid users or addicts whose infection massively amplified the effects of these drugs. This, on a surface level, could make some sense. All you have to do is look at the effects these substances have on the human body. Although they are commonly referred to as steroids or just anabolics, a more accurate name for these substances is anabolic androgenic steroids. That's because they are just one of the many classes of steroid hormones that our bodies can produce. The main representative of this group is testosterone, produced predominantly in the testicles, and despite its effects on muscle growth, this hormone is also responsible for the development and maintenance of male sexual characteristics as well as fertility in men, hence the term androgenic, meaning almost literally men creating. This class of hormones promotes the growth of facial and body hair and can cause scalp hair to turn into terminal hair, leading to baldness. Androgens also help in maintaining and even increasing bone density, enhance libido, and thicken the skin. But probably the most sought-after property of these hormones, at least for some, is the powerful anabolic effect. When we talk about anabolism, we're referring to the set of metabolic processes aimed at synthesizing new compounds. It is basically the creation of new tissue or its building blocks. Muscle growth is precisely an anabolic process, one that is strongly enhanced by anabolic androgenic steroids. And as a fun fact, these hormones don't just increase muscle size, they also enlarge the prostate, which can lead to some problems. Now back to the topic, the fact is that androgens, and particularly testosterone, either directly or indirectly, are responsible for the general tendency of men to be taller and heavier than women, mainly due to a greater bone and muscle mass. Beyond this, testosterone not only promotes the growth of these tissues, but also contributes in maintaining them. It also induces an increase in total blood volume and in the number of red blood cells in circulation, and this is why anabolic androgenic steroids are used to some extent to treat certain chronic illnesses. For example, to prevent or reduce muscle wasting and to help treat or even reverse some types of anemia. However, the most popular use of these substances is probably to enhance athletic performance, usually against the rules of some sports. All of these effects can be seen to varying degrees in the tanks. High muscle mass, reddish or flushed skin, which suggests an elevated hematocrit, meaning that their blood has a higher proportion of red blood cells. Also, their bones are strong enough to support not only their own weights, but also whatever they are capable of carrying. The problem with the steroid abuse hypothesis that's so popular is not really in the modifications we can see in the tank, but rather in the regulatory mechanisms behind these hormones. Taking androgenic anabolic steroids from a source outside of the human body suppresses our own organism's natural ability to produce them, at least temporarily. Taking anabolic steroids in supraphysiological doses inevitably leads to testicular or gonadal atrophy, a side effect that can be reversible or not depending on the total dose taken over time. High concentrations of androgens in blood not only suppress their own production in a phenomenon called a negative feedback loop, but are also toxic in a dose-dependent manner to testicular Leydig cells, the ones that produce testosterone in the first place. So, unless the tank is still injecting himself after being infected, this hypothesis just doesn't make sense. Without the ability to inject his androgenic steroids and given the testicular atrophy caused by their abuse, the truth is that instead of gaining muscle mass after infection, the tank would have likely begun to lose it. So the most plausible explanation is that their own bodies are producing these steroids, which by the way can also be synthesized in the adrenal gland. In this case, those glands could serve as an accessory source of androgen production. But there are another couple of things we have to take into account. For example, this infected presents a number of anatomical features that cannot be explained by steroids alone. While the tank certainly exhibits extreme muscle hypertrophy, this oddly manifests in a localized manner, concentrated especially in the muscles of the back, the shoulder girdle, and the upper limbs. Beyond that, we are not just talking about high muscle mass, but also about significant bone modifications. The muscle hypertrophy is accompanied by the elongation of bones such as the humerus, ulna, radius, and probably also the clavicles and scapulae. The arms are disproportionately large compared to the rest of the body, but perhaps the clearest example of these alterations is found in the hands, practically deformed by the growth of both bone and muscle. This is likely accompanied to varying degrees by edema or swelling caused by the constant blows and trauma the hands have to endure during movement and attacks. Another organ that clearly shows hypertrophy is the tongue, something not typically associated with anabolic steroid use. This alteration, known as macroglossia, causes the tank's tongue to remain permanently protruded, although the excessive growth of the thoracic muscles might also contribute to this by mechanically interfering with jaw closure. For all of these reasons, in my opinion, it is much more likely that the changes we observe in the tank are the result of an increased secretion of just not one but several hormones by its own body. Given the fact that the green flu is a pathogen that attacks the brain, it is possible that it alters the natural secretion of various hormones by affecting structures like the hypothalamus or the hypophysis. These parts of the brain are responsible for regulating the production of not only androgens but also of many other hormones essential for the functioning of the human body. This is something that I already mentioned in other analyses, like in the case of the Haram virus from dying light. In the case of the tank, the green flu would have induced an abnormally high secretion of both androgenic steroids and somatotropin, the growth hormone. This hormone, produced by the hypophysis or pituitary gland, is not only capable of enhancing muscle growth, much like testosterone, but it also leads to the elongation and growth of bones, something that in adults concentrates particularly in regions like the hands, which lines up quite well with the anatomy of this infected. And although it is not a particularly common side effect, abnormally high levels of growth hormone can result in macroglossia, the already mentioned enlargement of the tongue. On the other hand, this hormone also induces an increase in glucose production by organs such as the liver and to a lesser extent the kidneys. In excess, somatotropin has diabetogenic effects. It can cause diabetes, the famous metabolic disease characterized by chronically high levels of glucose in blood. But in the case of the tongue, it is highly likely that the excessive amount of glucose in its blood serves to help sustain its extremely high metabolic rate and activity. Glucose is the primary energy substrate for most of our cells, and fortunately, our bodies are capable of converting amino acids from the proteins in our muscles into glucose for energy use. So, in theory, tanks could be the type of infected with the highest resistance to starvation among all of those created by the green flu. And by the way, if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing, as the better this channel does, the more time I can put into it, and I also would really appreciate it. But back to the topic, none of this explains the asymmetry between the upper and lower halves of this infected's body. Hormones travel through the bloodstream and therefore should have systemic effects, something that doesn't match what we observe. To explain this, I've come up with two main hypotheses. One is anatomical and the other is physiological. From an anatomical perspective, it is possible that the changes undergone by the tank led to an inadequate blood flow to the lower limbs, either because the rapid transformation damaged distal circulation or because the increased muscle mass, poor posture, and likely the alteration of internal organs compressed important arteries such as the external or even the common iliac arteries, blood vessels responsible for supplying the lower limbs. In any case, insufficient circulation would lead to a low supply of oxygen and nutrients to these tissues and to a reduced hormone diffusion, preventing them from growing proportionally with the rest of the body. We could confirm this hypothesis by observing discoloration such as pallor or cyanosis, a bluish tint, in the distal areas of the lower limbs. On the other hand, there is also the possibility for a physiological explanation. The hormones our body produces act by binding to structures called receptors, which are located on the surface and to a lesser extent inside the cells that are sensitive to those hormones. We could think of hormones as messages and hormone receptors as the tools our cells use to decrypt or decipher those messages. Muscle cells have receptors for androgens, and when activated by these hormones, they are the ones that trigger the actual effects of those substances. Now, as you can imagine, not all cells have the same exact receptors for all hormones, nor do they have them in the same quantity or proportion. That's why some tissues are more sensitive than others to the effects of a given hormone. In the case of androgenic steroids, for example, certain muscle groups have more androgen receptors and are therefore more sensitive to their effects. This is true for the muscles of the neck, particularly the trapezius, but also for the leg muscles and, interestingly, the elevator ani muscle, the muscle that raises the asshole. Now, considering the varied and rather spectacular effects the green flu can have, it is possible that this infection may be capable of modifying the expression of androgen and growth hormone receptors in different parts of the body, leading to the asymmetric effects we observe in this type of infected. Another rather disturbing detail about the tongue would be the origin of the matter, the biomass needed to sustain all this bone and muscle growth. The tank, during the initial stages of its transformation, was likely driven by a ravenous hunger to consume enormous quantities of food or corpses, so one of the initial symptoms of their transformation might have been polyphagia, meaning excessive eating, or hyperorexia, excessive hunger. Guys, as I said, if you liked this video, please consider subscribing and most importantly, leaving your opinion or other life forms you want to see analyzed in this channel. I hope you liked this video and I'll see you all in the next one.